I have a question for you. What is it called when a ship design from an anime from the 1978 is so bad that literally decades later they came up with a retcon and an alternate continuity to explain how bad this design is and how it came to be? Well, you call it the Musai. Hello and welcome to the first episode of what I hope will be many more, where I am going to talk about the ships of various sci-fi franchises, focusing at least at first on Mobile Suit Gundam, which is a very underrated for its very nice ships. I especially like the ships of the Earth Federation forces. They just have this really nice, cool, unique look, and they're also surprisingly realistic, especially with their internal layouts, considering what kind of show it is. So, there are other channels that have done a little bit on the ships of Mobile Suit Gundam, but nowhere near enough, and they haven't covered some of the ships that I think they really need to do, and they don't seem to be getting around to it anytime soon. So therefore, insert Thanos meme here.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
The Musai is a design so fundamentally broken, especially in its original incarnation, that ever since the original Mobile Suit Gundam came out, they have been trying to incrementally fix just how terribly designed the original Musai Cruiser was. It has a variety of problems. Just look at its shape. It's a high heel. It's a high heel in space with guns. This looks like somebody's luxury yacht that somebody just decided to strap some guns onto, shove some mobile suits in somewhere, and call it a day. Oh, and by the way, 90% of your space navy is going to be made up of this piece of junk that has terrible hitbox angle from every angle. It's got things sticking out. It's got this huge honking nose that serves no discernible purpose, and it's got gimmicks. So the part one of this, I'm going to look at why the Musai is not a cruiser. It's just not. And what makes this even funnier to me personally is that in the new the Origin continuity, they are saying that the Musai was a fleet of civilian transport liners, the Arcana class, that were designed in secret to be converted into the Musai, and that's why it has this truly bizarre shape to fly under the nose of the Earth Federation forces.
Back into orbit, Earth Federation forces are gone.
No. First of all, that's a retcon 30 years later in a divergent timeline. The events in the original Mobile Suit Gundam timeline and the current and the new the Origin timeline are different in a substantial enough number of ways. For example, mobile suit development happens much faster and is much more advanced. For starters, much quicker. That's just number one. So they've also kind of tried to retcon the lore of almost the entire Zeon Navy. For example, the Chive, which is one of the Zeon ships I actually like, is now, it's not like some old clapped up piece of junk, which is what it was originally. It is now, was specifically designed for the very same Navy. This ship Which is the same Navy saying, "Oh, we built these to be converted in secret to our mainline cruiser," but they're building these openly, and these. So you're building warships that look like warships, but the rest of your fleet, 90% of it, it's freighters or passenger lighters. And what makes it even more egregious is they had that according to this new timeline, they had about 20 years to fix some of the more glaring design issues here. Like its bizarre shape, for starters. Even for a civilian ship, that especially like that curved neck section, which of course that's where they put the guns and the missile batteries for some reason. That doesn't make any sense. Like, why not just build the ship in a straighter line? If you want this thing to be converted to a military ship, especially, why are you making your job more difficult than it has to be? Come on. So, first episode will be about explaining how, if it is supposed to be a converted civilian ship, this is what that looks like in real life. There are plenty of real-life examples of that. And I've got photos, videos, the works, some more recent examples coming out of China where they just like took containers and put weapons in the containers and dropped them on top of a container ship. Because you could do that with modern weapons.
I have one simple request, and that is to have sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads.
But the Musai doesn't get away with that. Because the design fundamentally makes no sense. Even as a civilian ship, why would you design it with that? Like I said, it's got that weird neck section in it. It's just stupid. So it's like, whoever built this, as my friend Greenstar said when I explained this to him and got involved in this whole project, he said it looks like somebody's yacht. He says it looks like some rich boy's yacht. Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. And by the way, there's a solid history of yachts being converted for military purposes as well, especially when, you know, you're... huge chunk of the ships in this book are yachts that were borrowed from their owners by the U.S. military early on in the war until they had... early on in World War II until they had enough proper ships to do the job, but up until then they were stuck with what they had, so they had to get creative, right? Zeon has been planning this war for at least 20 years. The war starts in 0076. That's when Zeon declares independence from the Earth Federation forces. They have been planning this war since UC 58. That's when they came up with this terrible freighter passenger lighter, which will be later converted into a cruiser. I'm sorry, what? So, we're going to go over the real-life history of civilian ships being commandeered not commandeered, but borrowed in times of war, armed, and used for military duties, and not just transporting stuff. And what that looks like. It's been officially voted that there will be a part 2 and a part 3. Part 2 will be looking at the actual severe design flaws of the Musai itself that make it there's no way you can explain away how bad these things are. And part 3 we are going to do a redesign of the Musai that uses actual real-life examples of how these ships were used to make the Musai make some sort of sense. There's a long history of actual real-life navies doing this exact same thing. I've got literal books about this topic. Okay? I've got 2 downstairs. I'll bring them up when I'm done this, and I'll put them on the screen to show you. I know what I'm talking about. This is not something that's new. You know, in naval history. And here you can see photos of exactly what I'm talking about. This is the real-life World War II German equivalent of exactly what a Musai is claiming to be. This is a photo, or these are photos, of a Speerbrecher, which literally means barrier or barrage breaker. The barrier / barrage they're referring to is a mine barrage, which is the proper term for a mine field. The idea behind these ships was that instead of spending the time, effort, and resources to build a brand new ship that could very easily be sunk by a mine like that, which is a huge amount of wasted resources and build time in a shipyard you could use for something else, why not just take existing civilian ships and convert them for this very dangerous purpose of running ahead of the more valuable and expensive ships to basically detonate ifness and act basically as an anti-mine bodyguard. That's what these ships were for in World War I. In World War II, they were also used as escort vessels, more specifically for for example, they would escort ships in and out of channels of harbors, which were frequently mined from the air by enemy airplanes. They would escort convoys, so most providing cover mostly against air attack and attack against smaller mosquito ships that were frequently problematic in especially like in coastal and river areas where you didn't need long range ships to get at your enemy. But point is that the actual World War II Kriegsmarine, upon which, and let's remember that the Principality of Zeon is heavily influenced by World War II German fascism.
聞こう、知っておるか。アドルフ・ヒトラーを。
ヒットラー、中世紀の人物ですな。
ああ、独裁者でな、世界を読み切れなかった男だ。貴公はそのヒトラーの尻尾だな。
私が
わしはジオンの国民を急ぎまとめる方便としてこう仰せを敷いた。ジオンの理想を実現するためにな。しかし
ヒットラーの尻尾の私が独裁制に持ち込んだ。
キシリアとな。
はい、絶対民主制は連邦ごとき軟弱を生むだけです。それでは人類は共食いになります。今度の戦争のように。勝ってみせます。
Because that's the kind of guy Garen was. He was like Space Trump. He would take that as a compliment. So, point is that the actual World War II German, Principality of Zeon, had a huge fleet of these very same kind of like converted and armed civilian vessels that were requisitioned by the military and armed. And these were fairly simple, straightforward conversions. The whole point was to keep the cost down by not building brand new ships for fairly simple, straightforward patrol duties that only really needed a ship that could carry some guns. You didn't need something elaborate for that. You didn't need a brand new ship for that, so they didn't bother building them. And the Germans weren't the only ones that did this either. The U.S., British. Point is, everybody did this and will do this during wartime. Putting guns on civilian ships that are currently in military use or could get into a military conflict is not new. They just don't call them what they aren't. These ships are collectively referred to as auxiliary ships. They are not intended, because they were never intended originally in their design to be military assets. They were requisitioned during wartime as military assets. Hence, they are auxiliaries. to the military. So, if you wanted to do a Musai properly, this is the real life equivalent. There are so many examples of these, and it's a real shame because they don't get much coverage at all because they're like this huge fleet of background ships that don't look cool, basically. There were far more of these things than there were actual warships in operation, because for every one proper, expensive warship, you had like 2 or 3 of these things running around protecting them. For example, like I just mentioned, you know, the Spear Breaker, it had a very important, simple job, which was, if necessary, to take a mine impact. And here's a photo of what one of those looked like, by the way. The ship is literally broken in half. The mine detection equipment at the time was was primitive enough that they had to resort to measures like this to protect more expensive warships. It just, and as far as the Germans were considered, it just wasn't worth the expense of building a completely new ship when it could just end up like this. Like, why bother? So they converted existing civilian ships instead. And you can see like all the the gun tubs and everything, and you'll notice that many of these are placed up quite high. Well, the reason for that they did that is because they need to clear all the civilian ship stuff. They need to bring the gun barrels clear of all the civilian, like the very high bows and all the rest of it, because they didn't do major modifications to these ships. They basically just took the existing ship, put gun platforms on them, made sure that they were firing over the bow, they had clear fire, and put like a military radio in there, put different things replace the civilian stores with military ones, weapons, ammunition, whatever, and that was it. Although some of these Spear Breaker were quite involved in terms of like when they started modifying them with the VES gear, which was like this very specific, which was like what was now known as degaussing equipment. But they had this really interesting thing here, which you can see, like this huge pack of coils, or this like V-shaped, this inverted, this V-shaped thing on the front. That's a VES system. And what that is, basically, it projects a huge false electromagnetic signal ahead of the ship to detonate magnetically fused mines prematurely. Because they would think that the big magnetic signature was a ship hull and not just a fake signature, and it would set these mines off, and it was apparently quite effective. The thing is that that simply adding one of these pieces of kit to even if it were to an existing ship hull, was very expensive and required a lot of copper wiring. So it was not cheap. And they never had enough of these things to deal with the losses or just demand, because that's how war works. You very rarely have enough of what you want in the real war for anything. You have to divvy it out and whoever gets it gets it. So that's my rant on just because you put guns on it does not make it a warship, because we have this in real life. They're called auxiliaries. If you've watched the whole thing, then thank you for still being here. That was part 1. You may have noticed it was a little chaotic, more than a little chaotic, because I just had this idea one day, and I was like, you know what? The Musai is a really unbelievably bad ship design, and nothing about it makes any sense. Especially the moment you look at the shape and what it's supposed to do, and who built it, and why they built it, and the way it was meant to be employed, i.e. alongside / with mobile suits, the whole thing just falls apart so quickly. It's ridiculous. And if anything, Mobile Suit Gundam New Origin just makes this worse by trying to trying to excuse how bad it is by the way, it was a civilian passenger liner for 10 years before they turned them into cruisers. Well, as I pointed out, just because you put a gun on it doesn't make it a light cruiser, because that's a warship. That's a proper warship that's built as a warship from the beginning. It makes it an auxiliary cruiser at best, and in this case, a really badly designed one. So part 1. Part 2, where I will have the aid of a guy who actually understands a little bit about how to write a script so it flows, will be me and Green Star basically tearing all the design flaws of this terrible bloody ship in universe apart, basically. Both as an in-universe ship and why it doesn't work in its own universe, and both from a real-life perspective. So that's it. That will be part 2. And in part 3, we will be redesigning this horrible, bloody mess of a ship to make some kind of sense. And we will be using the examples I've already outlined in part 1 of actual, real-life civilian ships that were requisitioned in military service and have guns put on them. Because there's lots of examples of that in real life. They could have drawn from any of those as inspiration for the Musai, and made it make a bit more sense, right? For example, you've got the merchant raiders of World War I and World War II the Germans used. You've got various auxiliary cruisers, which were mostly World War I thing that the British used to, increase the number of ships that they had defending their huge area of ocean. But they found out that you can't just slap guns on a passenger ship and call it a day, because as soon as an actual cruiser shows up, that ship is screwed. So the idea was basically scrapped as being effectively worthless. And there are so many types of auxiliary ships, the majority of which have been civilian transport vessels of some kind or other, pressed into military service and armed with weapons of some variety, or refitted for some specialized background role that gets almost no coverage. My God, just look at all the different things that the LST, the landing ship tank, was refitted. I mean, the landing ship tank was basically just a built for military use version of one of these civilian transports, except it was built in huge numbers, specifically for large scale landing operations. So but because an LST was basically just a huge open bay, with a deck and another deck and just a huge area that you could put anything in. Well, guess what they did with these things? If you thought there were a huge number of variations on these things, either converted in the field or at a dock back home, and some of them were very simple refurb changes, and some of them were quite extensive conversions. Like, for example, the fighter direction tender right here, which was used to direct Royal Navy, which was used by the Royal Navy to direct aircraft during the D-Day invasion. They fitted this thing out with some pretty impressive communications gear and a big radar. They built 3 of these things. So, point is that there's plenty of ideas for what the Musai could be used for that makes some kind of sense. So, yeah, if you want it, vote in the comments. What would you use the Musai as? If you say cruiser, I will ignore you, and so will Green Star. We're not doing that. What would you use the Musai as to make it make a bit more sense? Just a troop transport, or something a little bit more elaborate, like a Zeon version of the fighter direction tender for guiding the invasion of Earth, for example. Put a big bloody radar installation in that empty section so it makes some kind of use of that huge empty space. For example, that was one of my ideas, but we'll see what happens. So, but yeah, if you'd like to vote for some ideas, below. Give us some of your ideas, and we will also be having we will also be opening a poll. So yeah, if you're still here, thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Check out our Patreon. Nobody's checked out our Patreon. We got stuff there for free just for checking it out. Just please do it. Remember to check the community tab once in a while. Otherwise, you can't complain if you have no idea what's going on. And we will see you next episode.